Say something stupid, Keith. I see you recording me.
I don't say anything stupid. Welcome to 2A Cops, Cops Supporting Gun Rights. Our hosts, Keith and Matt, have over 50 years combined experience as police officers serving in California. In this podcast, we'll talk about all things related to the Second Amendment from a cop's perspective and dispel the myth that cops are for over-the-top gun control.
All right, welcome to 2A Cops podcast for the Cops Supporting Gun Rights. I'm Matt.
I'm Keith.
And today we are going to talk about why, as cops who have actually had friends and coworkers killed, why we still support the Second Amendment. What I've found in running my social media stuff, it's always been pro-gun. For that matter, my Deputy Matt page that I run started out as gun content and later evolved into cop content. I've had people ask, as a cop who's had coworkers murdered, how is it that you can support the Second Amendment? I mean, these are people like honestly asking that, not people trying to be jerks about it. And it's because there are two different types of arguments. There's the how can you support? I mean, why wouldn't you want guns banned? Is an emotional argument, whereas my support for the Second Amendment is based on not on emotions but on logic, and I look at it from a different standpoint. So for me personally, I did 22 years, Sacramento County. During the 22 years I worked there, I had 10 coworkers killed. 5 of them were murdered by gunfire. And that is just the deaths. That's not people who were shot and survived or who got shot at. Hell, I was shot at. Looking at just the people, that's just the people who were killed in the line of duty from my department alone during my career. And I know you've looked at the same numbers for yourself. Do you have
so the day I retired, so I did 29 years and 11 months. I just couldn't do one more month. And the day that I retired, I wrote an article. It's not online anymore. Maybe I should put that up on 2A Cops so people can see it. I'll put it back up.
Yeah, it can't hurt.
How many officers are going to die before an officer retires? I sat down and counted how many cops died during my 29 years.
And that was nationwide, right, for you?
What's that?
You were looking at national numbers.
I was. It was national numbers. It was 4,122 people were killed, or cops were killed. Now, the first person to die was on my very first day as a cop, and it was Officer Robert Rolston out of Anaheim PD. The last person to die was Matt's friend.
Bob.
Yep. Bob French, right?
Yep.
And he was actually, I didn't know Matt at the time. I think we had seen each other's articles, but we had not crossed paths yet.
Right.
And it was actually Bob's death that prompted me to write this article because he was a tenured cop. He'd been a cop for...
Bob and I went to the academy together.
Yeah, so he'd been a cop for over 20 years at that point.
Yep. And
when he died, I felt guilty because I had 8 friends that I knew that had died in the line of duty. And, for me, it was like I felt a little bit guilty. And like Matt, people had done their best to try and kill you, but it didn't work for them,
Right.
And, I felt a little bit guilty when Bob was killed because here I am getting to enjoy my retirement. And when I started counting, I couldn't believe that. It didn't take me that long for those people to think like, what a way to spend your last day. But
yeah, you can pull the numbers up real easily at odmp.org.
It is. And I mean, honestly, it took me 3 hours to figure it out and write the entire article.
Yeah.
And some of my friends, like Officer Willie Suis, he's an Oakland police officer. I actually knew him growing up. We grew up in the same city. We did not know each other, became cops, and we ran across each other because we were both on motors. And it was cool to see him. And then he died shortly thereafter. And he died from a traffic collision. But then there's others that were really good friends, like Deputy John Monago from Alameda County Sheriff's Office. I knew him since the beginning of my career, and his kid is actually friends with my son. They're really good friends, and he was murdered by some shitbag during a takeover robbery. And he was the first person to die that I was like friends with,
Gotcha.
where it's like, it wasn't like somebody that I kind of knew in passing, it's like, I know this guy, I know his family, our kids were the same age. And when he was murdered, at no time did I think we needed to go down and start doing, new gun laws, because gun laws never would have fixed anything.
Right.
They were pieces of shit that never should have been out to begin with.
So in my case, every time a coworker was murdered, you stop and think about it and you reflect on it. Bob was killed on August 3rd of 2017, and I was at the scene, and I didn't know it was Bob that had been shot. My partner and I was working evac at the time. We were at lunch down the street, and we get back in the car, turn it on, and the radio's blaring. There's a pursuit. There's officers shot. We're like, holy shit, let's go. So we get there, and I'm dealing with the scene, and of course my wife's yelling at me later because I'm running around in a bright red polo shirt, no vest on, and no radio, just with a gun and a badge.
That's all you need.
She wasn't real happy about that, but I'm like, hey, no one's looking for a cop in a bright red shirt, so I blended in. Anyway.
And to be clear, all you need is a gun and a badge anyway, so fuck it.
Well, for me, I just turn sideways and they can't hit me. At least I used to be able to anyway. So
just so you're clear, Matt is skinny as fuck. Go ahead.
I used to be. I'm not so much anymore. Anyway, so I'm at the scene. I'm dealing with that, and then I find out that I'm talking to one of my buddies who's there at the scene, who was there when the shooting happened, and he's like, "Dude, Bob got shot." And I'm like, "Bob who?" And he's like, and he tells me it's Bob French. I'm like, "Oh shit." So, and I had seen the paramedics working on him, and then they threw him in the bus and took off to get to the hospital, which is only a couple of miles from the scene. And then I want to say it was maybe 30 minutes later, we found out that Bob didn't make it. And, that anytime a coworker gets killed, it hurts. But with Bob, it was, I'd known the guy my entire career. I knew him from day one of the academy. So it hit home a little more. And then later that night, I'm sitting at home, and once I got home, first thing I did after I'd taken off my gun and everything was I sat down and poured a drink, drank another one, and then I started typing, and that's when I wrote up an article, which is probably the first one you saw that caused you to write yours, was that article I wrote that night, and it talking about pouring out emotions while you're writing, which makes for good reading sometimes, but it's tough when you're writing it. And while I was writing that, I started thinking, I'm like, well, fuck, maybe, this shitbag had a goddamn AK. Maybe we do need to outlaw, assault weapons. Like, you can't see my air quotes. But then I stopped and I'm like, wait a minute, this guy was a shitbag. That gun's not legal in California anyway. He should have been in prison. Some liberal judge let him out on some bullshit. It was that there was nothing about any gun control that stopped that guy from getting, this is California. Every gun law that they want to pass is already in effect. None of that stopped this guy from doing what he did. He was a multiple time convicted felon who was out on bail at the time that this happened. And the judge let him go out on bail because she felt sorry for him. There was no reason that guy should have been on the street. There's no reason he should have legally had a firearm, yet here he is with one. So it just proved to me, as I sat there, intoxicated, upset, pissed, even then I can stop and think, I'm like, wait a minute, gun control, if this is nothing other than a absolute, the perfect example of failure of gun control to do anything. It doesn't stop criminals. So that was one of those things where that was like my defining moment in thinking about, why as a cop do I not support gun bans?
And that's why, I look at some of these people, they cry like, we need to, so-and-so died and we need to do more.
If it can save one child.
And it's like, motherfuckers, if you had just looked at the laws that you had already, technically that guy shouldn't have had a gun already. So what is more gun control going to do?
Omaha officer Kerry Orozco.
Yes.
She was murdered like hours before she was going to go on maternity leave by a previously convicted felon who illegally acquired a firearm because his girlfriend, who knew he was a convicted felon and couldn't have guns, bought a gun for him. So there's already existing laws that prevent that, right, and make that a crime. Well, what did the woman who provided the gun to the felon who killed the cop get? Like informal 5 years of probation. That's it. They don't enforce the existing gun laws. That bitch should be in fucking prison.
And look, Matt and I were cops in California. Easily the most gun-controlled state in America. And I remember being in New Zealand, and I go there a lot and seeing all the guns that they have available. Essentially New Zealand, which at the time had strict gun control. I think they had more access to guns than Californians did. But now Matt and I are in Idaho, where we have constitutional carry. And I mean, Matt and I are trained on how to detect people that are carrying a concealed weapon. Everybody's got a gun. Like, everybody. I mean, like, you go to like a place like Boot Barn, and it's like 75% of the people are armed. I mean, my church, I was standing at the door, and we were just watching the people that had telltale indicators of being armed. Easily 30% of the church was armed. And I know it's a lot more than that.
Yeah. Well, my church is the gun store, so.
Heathen. So, I got to tell you, in the dichotomy of the two states, Idaho is very safe because everybody's got a gun, and you know not to fuck around or you're going to find out.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Where California, everybody's unarmed. And I look at some of my friends that have been killed, and I think a lot of them would, not a lot, but I think a few would have been saved if just Joe Schmo was able to carry concealed, because they would have blasted these guys, or these guys would have been killed a long time ago by some concealed carrier.
Exactly. That's the thing too. They wouldn't be around to get let off by a judge because some private citizen with a gun who ended up being a victim at one point would have been able to defend themselves.
I'll never forget the first couple months that I was here in Idaho. It's culture shock because you find out what America is really like, getting out of California. And there was a transient that was shooting at people at a park in Boise, and the cops rolled up and killed the bad guy, and he was homeless. And from California, you're totally expecting they're going to interview witnesses now on TV.
Oh, the horrible cops shot the poor guy who wasn't doing anything.
Fully expecting that he's just a homeless guy. Couldn't you have wounded him, right?
Right.
Oh no, man, this is my intro to Idaho. They interview this soccer mom, and I'm like, oh, here comes some soccer mom. This Karen's going to be like, did they really have to shoot him in front of the kids? She just lets out this is Idaho. How did nobody have a gun to stop this guy? And I'm like, yes, I love it. And the next interviewee was some boomer, and I'm like, here it comes. The boomer's going to be like slamming the cops. This is the counterpoint. And the next statement was, thank goodness for our Boise police officers to save the day. Thank goodness they were here for us and protect us. And I was like, oh, I'm in the right place.
Yep.
And it makes you, I remember going to, all those crimes and thinking, if citizens were armed, how many of these people would have been around to hurt us?
Where I worked was a different environment than where you worked. Sacramento, especially in the county, was not nearly as liberal as where you were a cop. So, and I went to calls all the time where homeowners protected themselves with guns. It was not an uncommon thing. And that was ones that, we had to go to, we got called because either shots were fired or they were holding a bad guy at gunpoint waiting for us to get there and hook him up. You think about all the incidents where a homeowner, a private citizen who's whether they're legally or illegally in California carrying a concealed firearm, but somebody starts, assaulting them or, coming up to try to rob them, and they clear leather. And the bad guy runs off. Shit, you're not calling the cops to report that, right? I mean, so think about all the incidents, knowing the ones that did occur that I went to. I think about all the ones that had to have occurred that we never found out about.
And so for the listeners, where I worked in the San Francisco East Bay, which is my jury pool is Oakland and Berkeley.
Yeah, you're a little more liberal than rural Sacramento County.
fucking
I
shithole.
shouldn't say
So,
rural. It's not very rural, but the
yeah.
unincorporated parts.
And no, we didn't have, I mean, the only time it was somebody defending themselves, it was a gang member that just happened to be strapped.
Or the
You know?
drug dealer who pulled his own gun out to defend
Yeah,
his life.
exactly. That's what it was. It was one drug dealer defending himself against another. It was never a normal person.
Right.
And I'll never forget we got a call of a hot prowl in the middle of the day. It was a lady that was at hot prowl for the non-cops is somebody's at home when somebody breaks into the house. And I remember when I rolled up, the suspect was fleeing. Some cops were chasing him, and I met the lady, and she was like, she was almost like afraid to talk to me. And I'm like, hey, it's all right. Do you have anything in your house to defend yourself? Because I'm going to talk to her about protecting herself so she doesn't get killed
The next time around.
because it's going to happen because it's California,
Right.
Especially the East Bay. And so I asked her, I'm like, do you have weapons? She's like, well, I had a shotgun, and I went to my closet. I got the shotgun and I loaded it. And the guy opened the door, the door, and he had a fireplace poker. The guy grabbed the fireplace poker and was clearing the house. Well, what's he going to do with that? He ain't going to stoke a fucking fire, right? Yeah. And I'm like, well, why didn't you shoot him? And and I know you're not supposed to ask that, but it's like,
right.
You're just kind of like,
you're just kind of dumbfounded at that point. Like, yeah, I would have shot him.
Like, this would have been so awesome.
Yeah. Talk about legit shoot.
Oh yeah. I mean, the guy's standing there with a hot poker. She's retreated to the last place she can possibly go.
Yep.
And I'm like, she's like, well, I thought I was going to get in trouble.
Yeah, which is unfortunately that's what a lot of cops are doing right now. They're afraid to shoot people and they're getting their asses beat and stuff because they're gun shy because of the way the media is treating cops. But that's a totally separate subject.
No, we'll talk about that because I have been there. I had an incident where the first thing that I thought as I was clearing leather and getting ready to pull up slack on the trigger was I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah,
because my agency was at the time was so fucked up administratively that was what was that was all you were worried about. But
I want to talk about one other aspect of this too. But since I've retired, it was just a couple of weeks ago. 3 of my former coworkers were shot. One of them died. One of my department's canines was killed. And one of the guys who was shot is a good friend of mine. I've known him since he was a trainee. He was one of my buddy's trainees. Real squared away dude. He's actually former Marine. Just straight up squared away guy. And I don't mean to speak for him. I'm not trying to speak for him, but he's always been a very pro gun guy. And honestly, I mean, I can't imagine his opinion changing much. I know after it never even occurred to me after someone shot at me to want to think that, hey, we need more gun control. I can't imagine the same thing going with him. And I know, and I'm not trying to downplay his injuries because he got fucked up. He's at home now, thank God. But he's recovering, but who knows if he's going to make it back to work. I know one of the other cops that was shot has also got some severe injuries and has a bunch more surgeries coming down the road. It's the whole, and I look at those incidents. I look at all of my former coworkers that were murdered where the suspect is known. One of them, unfortunately, the suspect is still outstanding. But all the ones where the suspects are known, every single one of them is a prohibited person. They were all guys who were convicted felons, career criminals who already had previous gun crime or crimes involving firearms. They're prohibited persons. They can't legally, even on a federal level, have a gun, let alone in California. And a lot of times, looking at Danny Oliver, who was killed on October 24th, 2014, Danny was killed by a guy who was a repeat. He was an illegal immigrant. I'm going to refer to him as an illegal alien. He had been deported multiple times. That guy had an illegally obtained AR-15. Bob French was murdered by a guy who was a convicted felon who had an AK-47. Mark Stasiuk, he was the last guy murdered on my department before I retired, and he was murdered 5 months before I retired. And he was killed by a prohibited person who had an illegally obtained firearm. And Mark was not the only cop that was shot that day. Julie. I'm drawing a blank on Julie's last name. She was military vet, now a deputy. She was in a gunfight with the dude. She got shot in the arm and stayed in the gunfight. And then they caught the dude around the corner and he gave up. But, I look at all these guys and every incident where and even looking at on a national level, most of the cops that have been killed by guys who are prohibited persons. It's a complete lack of the ability of gun control to stop people.
And I'm going to go off about our new vice president here. It all comes down to prosecutors not prosecuting the laws that are on the books.
Right. Exactly. 100%.
And a good example is Kamala Harris. She was a prosecutor in my office, or in the prosecutor's office in my county. And whatever you read about her, just know she's a bad fucking person. Forget all this other stuff that you read in the news. Talk to the people that know her and had to deal with her. She's a bad person. And there's an officer, she left us in Alameda County to become the DA in San Francisco so she can then become the district attorney of San Francisco. When she was the DA of San Francisco, Officer Isaac Espinoza from San Francisco PD was shot and killed by a gang member. I think he had an AK-47, and it was a clear-cut death penalty case, and she refused to do it because she felt that it was morally wrong. Well, bitch, it was morally wrong to kill Isaac too.
Yeah.
And I digress, right? But she is an example of a person that would not prosecute gun crime
unless it was a normal citizen. Because as the attorney general, she went after a shitload of regular citizens.
Yes, they would go after normal people that had an AR or whatever. Just stupid shit, right? Or send the DOJ Bureau of Firearms, which fuck those guys. And I know I have former friends that work there, but those guys are just need a fucking.
That bureau itself in the DOJ is fucked.
What's that?
That bureau within the DOJ. Yeah. Not everybody that works for California DOJ is fucked up, but the Bureau of Firearms, those guys are fucked.
Let me tell you, California Department of Justice does some fabulous work. The Bureau of Firearms, they can go get fucked because they are doing stuff to really hurt regular citizens and destroy the Second Amendment. But with that said, she would send Bureau of Firearms out to go out and just screw over regular everyday citizens. Meanwhile, guys that are killing people with guns, they're not going after the gun crime associated with that.
Yeah. Plea the guy down.
And so, but yet they're going to go ahead and create all these new laws that are just fucking over regular people.
Yeah.
And that's all these new gun laws do is just make criminals out of regular people. And I truly believe that people need to start listening to the cops when it comes to these issues, because all of us are on the same page. Or maybe like 2% of all cops aren't on the same page with us.
Right.
But we talk to enough cops around the country to know that God, could you imagine in California if they legalized concealed carry, like constitutional carry, and everybody just started getting to carry a gun? How many dead criminals there would be in the first month? It'd be glorious.
It would greatly reduce the recidivism rate.
Oh, if I was king for a day, that's what I would do. If
the thing is,
legally possess a gun, then you get to carry it concealed. Go.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, just go forth and destroy those fuckers.
The thing is, what kills me about this thing, about the gun control laws that we're talking about, the stuff that they're trying to pass, HR 120 or 127. It's being these laws are being proposed and pushed by the very same people that are letting all these criminals out of prison and reducing crime penalties for legitimate crimes. So they want to pass these laws that's going to make Joe Blow citizen who has done absolutely nothing other than potentially not registering their firearm. They're going to turn those people into felons, but they're looking at these guys who are out actually committing violent crimes with firearms, and they're making them out to be the victim. It's just, It's the same people doing both sides. So I don't understand how somebody, and taking politics out of it, I don't understand how a voter can look at a politician, whether, no matter what party they're from can look at that politician and go, gee, I can totally see how it makes sense to outlaw guns, but then not prosecute people who commit gun crimes. I mean, there's a huge disconnect there. It's got to. I don't know. I mean, one of my favorite sayings, and it does bring politics back into it, but it's like liberalism is the number one mental disorder in the United States, because it's the liberal politicians that are doing this, and the voters that are voting for them and putting them in office.
And we need to get ready because it's coming. They've already started, and people need to be active in contacting their congressmen and senators and letting them know what they think. It does have an impact by contacting those people and telling them what you think.
Yep.
Even if you're in California, there's nothing better than trolling Nancy Pelosi.
I love Twitter. I haven't been banned yet, but I'm assuming it's coming.
Fucking raggedy bitch. All right. Yeah. Well, so that about sums it up. Even though we have friends that have been murdered in the line of duty, our friends that were killed, us, the cops, we still don't support all these new gun laws in their name. We would all still be supporting the right to have and bear arms.
Exactly.
Well, that's it. If you can do us a favor and subscribe and rate us on iTunes, it helps people find us. And then just leave a note about what you think about the podcast. And most importantly, if you have an idea for us to talk about, contact us at podcast@2acops.com. In the meantime, you have a safe week, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to and rate 2A Cops on your favorite podcast service. You can subscribe to our newsletter and get current 2A news at 2acops.com. If you have any questions you want answered on the podcast, email us at podcast@2acops.com.